Chapter 1. By the time my husband realized he had not won our divorce, it was already too late. He sat in family court in a tailored navy suit, ready to take the house, the business, the cars, and everything. He thought proved he had built a perfect life while his mother waited outside like I was finally being erased for good, and the woman he replaced me with was already talking about changing my kitchen. 3 months earlier, that same man had looked across our dinner table and told me I could keep our 16-year-old son, as if I was being handed the emotional leftovers, while he walked away with everything that mattered. My name is Ava Rowan, and what my husband never understood was that I had spent years making his life look rich, long before I learned it was all built on debt lies, and one mistake he was arrogant enough to sign with his own hand. The first thing my husband took from me was not the house. It was my place in it. From the street, our life looked like one of those polished suburban pictures people save on Pinterest and quietly resent. We lived in a big brick house outside Franklin, Tennessee, in a neighborhood with stone entry signs, trimmed hedges, and boys on electric scooters gliding past mailboxes that all matched. The kitchen had cream cabinets, brass pulls, and a wide island I had fought for when the builder said it would cost more. The living room stayed clean enough for guests because I made sure it did. My son went to a good school. My husband wore tailored jackets and walked into rooms like he owned not just the room, but the future of everyone in it. His name was Bennett Rowan, and on paper he was the founder of Rowan Crest Homes, a boutique residential development company that built the kind of houses people toured on Sundays just to see what success looked like. On paper, I was hardly there at all. I was 37, and if you asked most people what I did, they would have said I helped my husband with his business, which is a beautiful way of saying I kept the machine running while someone else stood in front of it and took the credit. Before Bennett started making money, I worked as a legal assistant at Carter Wells and Dean. I knew contracts, timelines, filing systems, closing documents, pressure, the way one missed detail could poison an entire deal. When his company was still small and unstable, and always one delayed payment away from panic, I stepped in because it made sense. At first, it really did feel like we were building something together. Then together slowly turned into me. I revised proposals after midnight when Bennett had meetings the next morning. I called vendors and smoothed over delays before clients ever found out there had been a problem. I coordinated open houses, selected finishes, fixed staging mistakes, kept track of furniture deliveries, and learned which buyers needed reassurance and which ones needed flattery. I knew which subcontractor would answer on the first call and which one needed 3 calls and a threat of withheld payment. I kept our house clean enough for surprise investor dinners and warm enough for people to leave saying how grounded Bennett seemed despite all his success. I remembered our son Mason's orthodontist appointment school forms, football schedule, field trip deadlines, and the names of the teachers Bennett forgot 5 minutes after meeting them. I did not just support Bennett's life, I made it presentable. Inside the house, Bennett used the word "we" like it was sacred. We are expanding. We are taking on 2 more builds. We are finally getting where we deserve to be. Outside the house, under lights and blazers and photos and local business profiles, we became I. There was one project I still thought about more than I should have, a spec house on the edge of Leiper's Fork. It was supposed to be the company's breakthrough house, the one that would push Bennett out of regional success and into something shinier. 3 weeks before launch, the contractor bailed one of the tile shipments came in wrong, and the staging plan looked like a furniture warehouse trying to impress a dentist. Bennett panicked in private and performed confidence in public. I found a replacement crew, rewrote the finish order, got a rush delivery on lighting, and drove out there myself for 2 straight days arranging books, bedding, and kitchenware until the house looked like someone successful and quietly tasteful lived there. At the launch event, Bennett stood in front of a fireplace I had chosen and told a magazine photographer that building homes was about instinct and vision. I stood 10 feet away holding a clipboard and a bottle of water for him. That was how our marriage worked for years. He said we when he needed labor. He said I when he wanted applause. I should tell you that I did love him once, not the polished version of him, the hungry version, the one who drove a truck with a cracked console and talked about neighborhoods like he could already see what they would become, the one who kissed me in an unfinished kitchen and said someday this would all be ours. Maybe that is why it took me so long to understand what our life had become. If you help build a myth, it is very hard to admit you are not the heroine in it. You are just part of the scenery. The night Bennett asked for a divorce, there was salmon on the table, green beans I had overcooked by 2 minutes, and Mason upstairs pretending to study while watching basketball highlights on his laptop. Bennett sat across from me with both hands flat on the table, like he was about to discuss a refinancing package. He did not look guilty. He looked prepared. "I have been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "I do not want this to get ugly." Something in me went cold before he said the word. I think women know when a man has already rehearsed their pain alone. He said our marriage was no longer aligned with the direction of his life. That phrase. As if I were an old business model, not the person who had carried half of it on my back. He said he wanted to handle things respectfully, cleanly. He said it would be better for both of us if we did not drag this out. Then he started listing what he intended to keep: the house, the company, the vehicles, the business accounts, anything tied to operations, anything tied to future growth. He spoke in categories, not memories. Assets, not life. I remember staring at him, waiting for the place where the human part would show up. It never did. Then he said the sentence that split something in me so neatly I almost admired it. "You can keep Mason. He needs his mother more at this age anyway. Not take care of Mason, not live primarily with Mason. Keep him." Like I was being handed the domestic portion of the divorce, like the child and the emotional labor came as one package, and the things with market value belonged to him. I did not scream. I did not throw a glass. I did not ask if there was someone else, even though by then I already suspected the answer would be yes. I just sat there so still I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me, and understood in one brutal second that Bennett truly believed the most valuable thing I had contributed to our life was caretaking. He mistook my silence for weakness. I know that now. The next morning, he moved into the primary bedroom as if it had always been his private territory, and I had merely been allowed there. He left his shaving kit spread across the counter and his shoes near the bed, and spoke to me with a new tone that was almost managerial, practical, efficient, controlled. He told me we should be careful with spending while things were being sorted out. He said he wanted financial clarity. One of my credit cards stopped working that afternoon. When I asked him about it, he did not even bother pretending surprise. He said he had paused a few things until the process was more defined. The process. By day 3, he was referring to the house in a way that made my skin crawl. He spoke about it like a holding structure whose ownership was already morally settled, even if the paperwork had not caught up yet. He said things like, "While you are still here, and once this place is under one direction again." Under one direction. I had picked every fixture in that kitchen, and now he spoke as if I were camping in someone else's listing. His mother, Vivian Rowan, came by at the end of that week with a lemon pound cake and the expression women wear when they want credit for restraint. She was not loud. She was worse. Calm. Certain. She sat at my table, folded her hands, and told me men like Bennett carried more pressure than women often understood. She said successful men were pulled in many directions, and wise wives learned how to keep a home steady when the world demanded pieces of their husbands. She said a woman could not expect to be hard in some ways and soft in others and still keep peace under the same roof. Then she looked around my kitchen, the kitchen I had planned down to the sconces, and said Bennett had worked very hard to give this family such a beautiful life. Give. As if I had stood by a window all those years and admired him earning it. That was the first time I realized this was not just divorce. It was revision. They were not only ending my marriage, they were rewriting it in real time. The signs of another woman were there if I let myself stop being polite to my own intuition. A text preview lighting up his phone with the name Paige. A perfume on his blazer that was too floral and too young to belong to any room I had been in. A softness in his mood that did not come from peace, but from relocation, like he had already moved the tender parts of himself somewhere I could not follow. He became kinder in all the wrong ways, too measured, too gracious, too settled. Men do not get that calm when they are losing something they love. They get that calm when they have already put it somewhere else. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone quiet. The pendant lights cast the same warm pools over the counters. The bar stools sat exactly where I had placed them years ago. The bowl of lemons by the sink was still fresh because I had replaced them that morning out of habit, which felt humiliating in a way I could not explain. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked intact. And for the first time since Bennett had spoken those clean, bloodless words across the dinner table, I understood that what he had taken from me first was not the deed or the bank accounts or the life we had staged for strangers. It was my right to stand in that room as an equal. Chapter 2. In the weeks after that, the cruelest part was not discovering that Bennett had most likely found comfort somewhere else. It was watching how quickly people accepted his version of events, as if the life I had actually lived inside that house could be edited by anyone with a calm voice and a pressed shirt. He never raised his voice. That was part of what made him so effective. Men like Bennett do not need to be loud when the world already assumes they are reasonable. He moved through those first weeks of separation with the composed sadness of a man carrying a burden no one else could quite understand. He told people we were trying to handle things respectfully. He said it had been hard on both of us. He said he wanted stability for Mason. He said things had changed in our marriage in ways that were difficult to explain. Difficult to explain was his favorite kind of lie. It sounded dignified. It left room for other people to imagine I had become impossible. Vivian picked up the story where he left off. She started stopping by more often, always with a reason that made refusal look petty. A casserole. A stack of plastic storage bins. A church bulletin she said Mason might need for some youth fundraiser. She never directly accused me of ruining her son's life. She did something far more polished. She suggested things with a face full of concern and let other people do the arithmetic themselves. At a Sunday luncheon after service, I heard from a woman I had known for 8 years that Vivian had said I seemed overwhelmed lately and maybe had lost interest in supporting Bennett's career. Another neighbor squeezed my arm in the grocery store and said she was sorry everything was so sad, which told me Vivian had already begun distributing that phrase like branded merchandise. So sad. Such a shame. We just never know what goes on in a marriage. That was the thing. They did not know. But they were more comfortable believing something tidy than something true. The truth was uglier. The truth had invoices and missed sleep, and me standing in a pantry crying quietly because a cabinet installer had bailed 2 hours before investors came for dinner. The truth had my fingerprints on every polished surface of the life Bennett was now narrating, as if he had built it with his bare hands, while I drifted nearby being difficult. I still might have survived the gossip if it had stayed outside the house. What I did not know yet was that humiliation has a way of asking to come inside and sit at your kitchen table. One Thursday afternoon, Vivian arrived with 2 rolls of packing tape and a pack of black contractor trash bags in the back of her SUV. I opened the door and stared at the bags first. She smiled with that tight, patient smile older Southern women use when they want to pretend your discomfort is an overreaction. "I thought I could help make things less awkward," she said, "by throwing me away in industrial plastic." I did not say that out loud. I should have. She moved past me before I answered and set the trash bags on the floor by the stairs like she was unloading party supplies. Then she glanced around the foyer and lowered her voice. Bennett said you have not really started sorting your things yet. My things. As if 16 years of marriage had left me with a drawer and a tote bag. I told her I had not agreed to any timeline with her. She nodded as though I were a child struggling with disappointment. I know this is hard, Ava, she said, using my name in the tone people reserve for women they are about to correct. But dragging it out only makes it harder on everyone. Especially Mason. There it was again. The soft theft. My grief becoming an inconvenience. My son becoming a tool for urgency. She started in the upstairs hall closet, pulling out winter scarves, old photo boxes, a pair of boots I had not worn in years. Anything that looked feminine and undeniably mine went into the bags, not folded into boxes, not set aside with care, pushed into black plastic with the same brisk economy you use on yard waste. I stood in the doorway watching one of my sweaters disappear under a stack of old throw pillows and said, "You do realize trash bags send a message." She kept working. Only if someone insists on taking it personally. That line sat in my chest like acid. Mason came halfway down the stairs, stopped, and looked from me to the bags to his grandmother. "What is going on?" Vivian turned with perfect composure. "Just helping your mom get a few things organized, sweetheart." He looked at me. I could see he knew something was off, but he was 16 and still learning the difference between discomfort and cruelty. Before I could answer, Bennett walked in through the garage, took in the scene, and did not look surprised enough. "Maybe this is for the best," he said. "It keeps the process moving." I said process the way I say rot when I find fruit gone soft in the back of the refrigerator. Mason's face changed. Not all the way. Not toward me. Just away from certainty. That was when I understood how dangerous Bennett really was. He did not need to humiliate me directly if he could arrange the room, so I looked like the most emotional person in it. A few days later, the other woman stopped being a possibility and became furniture in my life. Her name was Paige Hollowell, and she first walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday morning carrying swatches and iced coffee like she had every right in the world to be there. She was younger than me by nearly 10 years and had the glossy, curated kind of beauty that photographs well because it already knows what a photograph wants. She worked in branding and client relations for Rowan Crest Homes, which I had known in the abstract and somehow refused to translate into something real. Bennett came in behind her talking about a staging concept for an upcoming launch, and then stopped when he saw me by the sink. Paige smiled too quickly. "I hope this is not a bad time." "No," I said. "Apparently it is exactly the right time." She pretended not to hear the edge in my voice and crossed into the kitchen with the comfort of someone who had been invited before. She set the swatches on my island. My island. Then she glanced up at the light fixtures and the open shelving and said, "This house had such strong bones, but could use a fresher hand in a few places." I looked at Bennett. A fresher hand. He was already in performance mode. "Paige is helping with visual strategy on the Brentwood property. In my kitchen. We had a meeting nearby," he said. I did not think it was a big deal. Of course he did not. To him, the emotional violence of that moment did not register because it cost him nothing. He had already relocated his guilt to a zip code where I did not exist. Paige drifted toward the counter by the stove and picked up one of the ceramic bowls I had found at an estate sale years ago. "This is actually kind of charming," she said. "It would be cute in a pantry shot." Charming. Cute. Like my whole life had become vintage props for her content plan. I did not confront her then. I think part of me wanted to see how far the performance would go if I did not interrupt it. Bennett was careful not to touch her in front of me. That almost made it worse. Affairs are obscene enough. Affairs conducted as if you are the rude one for noticing are a whole different class of insult. That afternoon, I called my closest friend, Lila Kent. Lila and I had known each other since our 20s. She had been there before Bennett had money, before the neighborhood, before the magazine features and catered open houses. She was the one person I thought still knew where the bones were buried beneath all the polished stone. She came over with Thai takeout and that warm, practical energy some women have when they sit down and make your pain feel organized enough to survive. "I knew something was off with him," she said, pushing a carton toward me. "I just did not want to say it too early. I should have trusted my gut." "You trusted your marriage," she said. "That is not stupidity." I wanted to believe her so badly that I let my guard down. I told her things I had not said aloud yet, that I was looking at a rental in Green Hills because I did not want Mason changing school zones, that I had met with a divorce attorney named Elise Warren just for an initial conversation, that Bennett was suddenly cagey any time I mentioned bank access or household accounts. Lila made all the right noises: shock, sympathy, quiet outrage. The next evening, Bennett came home, loosened his tie, and leaned in the doorway of the den while I was sorting Mason's school forms. "Green Hills, huh?" he said. "Ambitious neighborhood for someone claiming she needs to be careful with money." I looked up too fast. "What?" He shrugged. "If you are going to play the poor, abandoned wife, you might want to pick a cheaper zip code." My whole body went still. I had not told anyone about Green Hills except Lila. 2 days after that, I mentioned to Lila that Elise had asked whether Bennett had opened any lines of credit against the house without fully walking me through them. It was a half-formed fear more than an accusation. The next morning, Bennett cornered me in the laundry room and said, "If your lawyer thinks she is going to make this about business financing, she is out of her depth." He said it too specifically, too quickly. After he left, I stood there with a basket of clean towels against my hip and felt something collapse inside me that had nothing to do with marriage. I had lost my husband. Now I was losing the person I had trusted to watch me lose him. Mason was becoming harder to read by then. Bennett never openly turned him against me. He was smarter than that. He just framed himself as the grown-up willing to absorb conflict. He told Mason I was having a hard time adjusting. He said he wanted to keep things stable. He said adults sometimes see the same situation very differently. Every sentence made him sound calm, and me sound unstable without ever using either word. One night, Mason asked if I was planning to move him out of his school district. The question was cautious, not accusing, which somehow hurt more. "I am looking at options," I said. "Dad says you are making everything harder than it has to be." There was no anger in his voice, just confusion. A boy trying to locate truth by comparing which parent sounded less shaken. "Your father says a lot of things very calmly," I told him. Mason looked down at the floor. "He just wants things to stay normal. Normal for who I almost asked. Instead, I said, sometimes people use the word normal when they really mean comfortable for themselves." He frowned a little, then nodded in that teenage way that means I heard you, but I am not ready to know what to do with it. I hated Bennett most in those moments, not when he lied to me, when he made our son carry the fog of it. A week later, at a school booster event, one of the dads whose wife chaired the auction committee clapped Bennett on the shoulder and said, "I have always respected how you built that company from nothing, man." Incredible what one person can do with enough drive. He was not trying to hurt me. That was what made it sting. He was just repeating the public myth everyone had been handed. I smiled the kind of smile women learn young, the one that keeps your dignity from spilling in public, and said nothing. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. I told myself I was only checking what access I still had, only trying to understand what I would need if this became uglier. But some part of me was already hunting. I logged into an old shared document folder Bennett had forgotten to remove me from. There, buried between renovation budgets and closing schedules, was a refinancing document tied to the house. It was not the original mortgage paperwork I remembered. It was newer, larger, structured in a way Bennett had never fully explained. There was also a statement reference I did not recognize, and a transfer connected to an account I had never seen before. I stared at the screen until the words lost shape and became threat. Paige was not the whole story. Lila was not the whole story. What Bennett was hiding from me had teeth, and for the first time since he sat across from me and tried to divide up our lifelike inventory, I understood that infidelity might be the most ordinary part of what he had done. Chapter 3. I stopped sleeping through the night after that, not because I was crying. That part had mostly gone quiet. This was different. I would wake up at 2:14 or 3:07 or 4:22 and feel the shape of something wrong before my mind could even put language around it. Then I would go downstairs, open my laptop at the kitchen counter, and start pulling at threads. At first I told myself I was only trying to understand what was left, what accounts still existed, what my name was still tied to, what I would need if Bennett decided to turn the divorce into a performance of generosity while quietly sawing off every floorboard under me. But the deeper I went, the less it felt like housekeeping, and the more it felt like opening walls in an old house and finding rot that had been hidden behind fresh paint. There were loan statements I had never seen in full, a refinance on the house that had happened under the language of simplifying debt, a line of credit tied to Rowan Crest Homes with terms far more aggressive than anything Bennett had ever described at dinner, a transfer to an LLC with a name bland enough to look forgettable, which is exactly how people hide things in plain sight. I sat there scrolling through old emails until dawn glazed the windows over the sink, and for the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how I had missed it and started asking the right question. How had he made sure I would? The answer came back in pieces. When the company was small, Bennett had needed my eyes on everything. He used to bring contracts to bed and ask me to flag anything odd before a morning meeting. He would call me from job sites and ask me to patch over scheduling disasters. If a check was late or a client was getting nervous, I knew by lunch. Then the money got better. Or at least looked better. He started saying things like, "I do not want you carrying so much of this, Ava." Then this side is too technical, too. "Let me take that off your plate. Then Owen handles that now. No reason for you to get dragged into the weeds." It had sounded like care when it started. It had sounded like love. The wife who had helped him drag the business uphill was finally being spared the ugliest parts of it. Now I could see what it really was. He had not lightened my load. He had moved me away from the control panel. By the time Rowan Crest had a controller-separate software and more polished reporting, I was still deeply involved, but only in the parts meant to be seen. Client experience, staging, hospitality, design choices, smoothing nerves, making investors feel welcomed, keeping the visible life of the company elegant enough that no one asked what it cost to keep it looking that way. Owen Pierce had been in my inbox for years, just never in a way that lit up like danger until I read it backward. Subject lines like timing issue, liquidity pressure through closing, please hold vendor release until next wire lands. I remembered seeing those emails and thinking this was just how development worked. Money in one place, delays in another, a constant effort to keep projects moving. When I reread them after midnight, they sounded less like normal fluctuation and more like a man keeping plates spinning over concrete. A week after I found the refinance documents, my phone rang while Mason was at school and Bennett was out. It was Tessa Monroe from one of the furnishing vendors we used for model homes. Her voice was polite, in the careful way professionals get when they suspect they are calling into a mess. "Ava, hi. I hope this is still your number." "It is." "I am so sorry to bother you directly. We have an invoice that has rolled twice, and accounting asked me to circle back before we hold the next delivery." I stared at the cabinet in front of me. "That should be going through office, not me." There was a tiny pause. "Right. Of course. I just reached out because you were always the person who got things cleared up." That one landed harder than it should have. Outside my house, people still knew I was the one who kept the wheels on. Inside it, I had been recast as a woman who contributed moods and side dishes. I cannot authorize anything anymore, I said. I understand, Tessa said softly. I just thought you would want to know. When I hung up, I sat still for a long time. That was the moment the whole thing shifted from suspicion into architecture. Bennett was not just cheating. He was managing appearances over instability, borrowing against confidence, stacking polished surfaces over debt, and calling it success. Our house was not a monument. It was leverage. The cars were not wealth. They were obligations with good lighting. The events page glided into the watches. Bennett bought the tailored jackets, the builder lunches, the charity photos. All of it sat on top of something much shakier than I had been allowed to see. And the ugliest part was how ordinary his methods were. No grand criminal mastermind, just the slow arrogance of a man who believes that if he looks expensive enough, no one will ever ask what any of it is actually worth. I drove to see my Uncle Russell 2 days later. He lived outside Murfreesboro in a brick ranch house with a faded porch swing and a garage full of labeled bins because he had been an accountant his whole life and believed there was no crisis that could not be improved by a file folder and a pencil. My grandmother June had been his sister, and when she was alive, she used to tell me that women should never apologize for wanting something that could not be taken with a mood shift or a wedding ring. Money that is yours is not a moral failure, she used to say. It is insulation. I had laughed at that when I was 25. By 37, it sounded like scripture. Russell read faster than anyone I know. He went through the documents I printed, made a few notes, asked me which accounts had ever been mixed and which had remained separate, then leaned back in his chair. Your grandmother would be furious, he said, at him or at me. At him for being sloppy, and at you for waiting this long to call me. That made me smile for the first time in days. I did not know it was this bad. No, he said. You did not know because he made sure you saw the painted side of the wall. He helped me think clearly, which at that stage mattered more than comfort. What was actually mine? What had remained separate? What should never be moved casually? What paperwork I needed copies of? What needed to be stored somewhere other than the house? He did not promise miracles. He did not say I was about to outsmart the entire system. He just gave me the first thing I had felt in weeks that resembled solid ground. Procedure. I met with an attorney 3 mornings later. Her name was Nina Castellano, and she had the kind of office that made you believe she had seen every version of a husband trying to leave with the silverware and his dignity intact. She was in her 50s, sharp without being showy, and after 10 minutes with me, she had already set aside 3 assumptions I could see other people would have made. I laid out the facts as cleanly as I could. Marriage length, assets, the house, the business, Mason, Bennett's position, the strange financial documents, the quiet moves to isolate me. At first, she responded the way any competent divorce attorney would. You may be entitled to a significant portion of the marital estate, she said. The fact that he thinks he built it alone does not make that legally true. I nodded. But what if I do not want the estate? That made her stop. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Women usually say that when they are emotionally depleted, not when they arrive with 3 folders color-coded by exposure level. I am not depleted, I said. I am trying not to be stupid. She leaned back. Explain. So I did. Not dramatically. Not as revenge fantasy. I explained that the more I looked, the less I saw an empire worth fighting over, and the more I saw liabilities disguised as status. I told her the house itself no longer comforted me. The kitchen island, the cars, the business cards with Bennett's name embossed on them, none of it mattered if it was all tied to choices he had made, without full transparency and obligations. I had no interest in dragging into the next decade of my life. What I want, I said, is to protect my son, protect what is actually mine, and not walk out carrying debt he created while pretending he was building us a future. Nina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is not surrender. No, that is defensive strategy." Exactly. She reached for one of the folders again. If he insists on taking the full shell because he thinks the shell is the prize that changes how we structure this. It was the first time someone else had looked at the mess and not mistaken my restraint for fear. The same afternoon, I called Lila. I had not decided yet what I was going to do about her, but I needed to know if my instincts were grief or proof. I may have found a place in Belmead instead. I told her, naming a rental I had never contacted. Smaller than I wanted, but probably better long-term. Lila made a thoughtful sound. That might actually be smarter. Less pressure. 2 nights later, Bennett came into the den while I was sorting mail. "Belmead is an interesting choice," he said. "If you're trying to look practical, you are overshooting." I looked up slowly. "What did you just say?" He smiled without warmth. "Nothing. I'm just surprised you think that area makes sense." That was all. He walked out before I could answer. He did not know that in that moment he gave me certainty. I sat there with a utility bill in one hand and the full weight of that betrayal pressing into the room. Lila had not simply repeated things once in panic. She was feeding him. I did not cry over her. Not then. Pain was starting to sort itself inside me. Bennett got rage. Lila got cold. That evening, Mason found me in the kitchen staring at the espresso machine Bennett had bought a month earlier after telling our son he did not think it was the right year for an expensive summer program. Mason opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, then looked at the gleaming machine. "Dad keeps saying money is tight," he said. "So why does everything still look expensive?" The question came out awkwardly, half casual, half careful, exactly the way a 16-year-old says something when he suspects more than he understands. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked at him. Because sometimes looking rich and being okay are two very different things. He frowned. "Is that what is happening?" I could have told him everything. About the refinance the vendor calls the way his father had been moving debt around like furniture. I did not. "It is part of what is happening," I said. Mason nodded slowly. Not agreement, not trust, but movement. After he went upstairs, I took all the documents I had copied, slid them into 2 separate envelopes and wrote labels on both. One for Russell, one for Nina. Then I opened one more folder on my laptop and looked at the life Bennett was so determined to keep. By then, I could see it clearly. He was not fighting to hold on to wealth. He was fighting to hold on to the shape of wealth, the costume of it, the social version of it. And if he kept charging toward it with the same confidence he had worn to my dinner table, when he told me I could keep our son, he was going to wrap both arms around something far more dangerous than he understood. For the first time since all of this began, I was no longer only hurt. I was informed. Chapter 4. After that, I stopped looking for proof and started looking for shape. There is a difference. Proof is frantic. Proof keeps pulling at threads because it still hopes the truth might turn into something smaller if you just find the right document. Shape is calmer. Shape is what comes after you understand the room well enough to know where everyone will stand when the lights come on. By then, I knew what Bennett was protecting, and more importantly, what he was not. He was not protecting a real empire. He was protecting the image of one. The house, the cars, the polished office, the clean narrative that said he had built something solid and I had merely lived inside it. Once I understood that, I stopped wasting energy on wanting any of it back. That was the part no one around me could see. They thought I had gone quiet because I was worn down. I had gone quiet because I finally understood the map. Nina set up mediation for the first week of March. Her office was in Brentwood, all glass and order and expensive calm. By then, I had moved into the apartment in Green Hills with Mason. It was smaller than the house by a humiliating margin. The kitchen had sage cabinets, secondhand stools, and one drawer that stuck when you pulled it too fast. But nothing in it belonged to a lie, and that made it feel richer than the house I had left. Before the first mediation session, Nina looked at me across her desk and said, "Today you do not need to perform strength. You need to be believable." "I am believable," I said. She gave me a dry look. "You are too controlled when you are angry. Men like Bennett mistake tears for weakness and composure for threat. Today, let him think you are tired." That part was not difficult. I was tired. At mediation, Bennett came in wearing navy like every man who wants to look expensive without seeming like he tried. His attorney, Harold Whitman, carried 2 legal pads, and the expression of a man who had learned long ago that clients rarely pay him to tell them what they do not want to hear. Vivian was not in the room, but I could feel her there anyway, the way some mothers manage to haunt a negotiation they are not invited to. Paige was not there either, but her presence lingered in subtler ways. Bennett had begun speaking as if his future had already opened up in front of him, and all of us were just waiting on signatures. I kept my asks narrow. A reasonable settlement to get established, stability for Mason, my personal property, a clean separation from the business, no argument over the house, no dramatic speech about what I had contributed, no grand demand that he recognize my labor in front of God in the state of Tennessee. Harold noticed first. I could tell by the way his eyes sharpened every time I let another asset go by without contest. He was too seasoned not to find that strange. Bennett, on the other hand, relaxed by the minute. At one point, he actually sat back in his chair, folded his hands over his knee, and said, "I think we are getting somewhere productive." Productive. As if he were chairing a board meeting, and I were finally learning not to be difficult. Nina glanced at me, and I lowered my eyes just enough to look like I was choosing peace over principle. That was what Bennett wanted to believe, that I was too emotionally exhausted to understand what I was surrendering. Outside the office afterward, he caught up to me in the hall. "You see," he said quietly, almost kindly, "this does not have to be ugly." I looked at him, really looked at him, at the smooth confidence, the certainty that history was already tilting his way. "It already is ugly," I said. "You just like the lighting." He smiled at that, like I had confirmed I was still emotional and therefore manageable. He mistook restraint for defeat. Every time. The next few weeks were full of that kind of mistake. Vivian started speaking as though the outcome had already been blessed by the courts and by heaven. She called one afternoon while Mason was doing homework at the counter. "I am so relieved you are handling this sensibly," she said. "Dragging these things out only poisons children." I stirred pasta on the stove and kept my voice level. "I was not aware you were part of the legal process." "I am part of the family." That was exactly her point. In her mind, family meant access authorship control. She spoke about my marriage the way some women speak about a church renovation, regretful, but certain the right people are still in charge. At a fundraiser for Mason's school, I saw her near the silent auction table telling another woman that Bennett was trying to keep everything as stable as possible for his son. The word son landed with emphasis, as if Mason belonged to him in a way that made me temporary. I turned away before she saw me, not because I was afraid of confrontation, because I had started understanding how much damage a person can do while sounding gracious. Paige shifted too. She stopped acting like a secret and started acting like a coming attraction. When Bennett dropped Mason off one Sunday evening, Paige was in the passenger seat. Not hidden, not awkward. She lifted a hand and smiled through the windshield with the bland confidence of a woman who already thinks your life has started making room for her. A week later, Mason came home and mentioned that Paige had been talking about changing the dining room light fixture in the house because it felt too traditional. He said it casually, then watched my face. I set down the grocery bag I was unpacking. "Did she say that in front of your father?" He nodded. "What did he say?" Mason shrugged. "Nothing. He kind of laughed." There it was. Not passion. Not love. Management. Paige did not want Bennett's soul. She wanted the version of his life that photographed well. The house, the launches, the soft bragging rights of stepping into a world that looked curated and expensive from every angle. That same week, a payment bounced on one of Rowan Crest's staging accounts. I did not hear it from Bennett. I heard it because Tessa Monroe called again, clearly uncomfortable. "Ava, I know I should not keep calling you." "Then why are you?" A pause. "Because I think you are the only person in this whole situation who hears things before they become emergencies." I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. "How bad is it?" "I am not saying bad," she said too quickly. "I am saying two things that were always smooth suddenly are not smooth." That was all she gave me, and it was enough. Even Paige noticed pieces of it. I knew because Mason mentioned offhand that she got irritated when Bennett's card did not go through at dinner one night, and he had to use another one. Mason said it the way teenage boys say everything, like he did not care while storing every detail. "He told the waiter the bank froze it for fraud," Mason said. "I folded one of his clean sweatshirts and put it on the couch. Maybe they did." He looked at me for a second, then gave a tiny shake of his head. "Maybe." He was not with me yet, but he was no longer entirely with his father either. That was enough for the moment. Lila kept calling, kept texting, kept offering coffee and sympathy, and the kind of soft-voiced outrage that had once comforted me. I never confronted her, not directly. There was no point. Confrontation would have forced Bennett to be more careful. What I needed was for him to keep feeling safe. So I gave her safe things, selected things, harmless things. I told her one afternoon that Nina seemed focused on the value of the vehicles and might push there if the house stayed off the table. 2 days later, Bennett sent a message through Harold, making clear the vehicles were non-negotiable and tied to business continuity. I looked at the email and felt almost nothing. Betrayal becomes cleaner once it is confirmed. The hurt is still there, but it stops begging to be argued with. Harold was the only person in Bennett's orbit who looked less comfortable as time went on. During the second mediation session, after I again declined to make a bigger push on the house, he asked for a break. Bennett and Harold stepped into the hallway, and because conference room walls are never as private as people think, I heard pieces. "She is conceding too easily," Harold said, "or she knows she does not have leverage." "I am telling you this is exactly when I do not trust appearances." Bennett let out a short laugh. "You are overthinking it. She wants out." "Maybe," Harold said, "or maybe she wants you to think she does." I stared at the legal pad in front of me and kept my face blank. When they came back in, Bennett looked faintly amused, like Harold had insulted his intelligence by suggesting I might still have one. Later, Nina told me Harold had requested a fuller financial review before final execution. Not a dramatic forensic sweep, but enough to walk carefully through liabilities, encumbrances, exposure. Bennett did not want to spend the money or the time. He wanted closure. He wanted control. He wanted the satisfaction of seeing me leave with less than the life he had trained me to maintain. "He is rushing the part he should fear most," Nina said, "because he thinks he already won." She nodded. "And because men like him rarely believe the woman who made the life look effortless also understands how it was financed." A week before the final hearing, Harold sent over language confirming that his client had been advised to review additional financial detail and was choosing not to pursue expanded analysis before settlement. Nina slid the page across her desk toward me. "This matters," she said. "I know." It matters because after this, no one can pretend he was not cautioned. I signed what I needed to sign. Bennett signed what he wanted to sign. The track narrowed. The night before the hearing, the apartment was quiet in a way the house never was. Not better, not worse, just honest. Mason came downstairs around 11 in socks and a t-shirt, found me sitting at the kitchen counter with a mug of tea gone cold, and leaned against the doorway. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." He gave me a tired half-smile and walked in. The overhead light caught the green in the cabinets and made the room look softer than it felt. After a second, he asked, "Are you scared about tomorrow?" There was no accusation in it. No loyalty test, just a boy trying to understand whether the parent who looked calmer now was calmer because she had given up or because she knew something he did not. I thought about lying to him, saying no, saying I was fine. Mothers do that too often and call it protection. "Yes," I said, "I am scared." He nodded like that made sense. "But not of the same things I was scared of before." He looked at me. "What changed?" I wrapped both hands around the mug. I stopped being afraid of losing things that only looked valuable from the outside. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out the stool across from me and sat down. Down the hall, the apartment hummed softly. No echoing foyer, no showcase kitchen, no staged perfection. Just cheap paint, a sticking drawer, my son across from me, and the strange, steady feeling of standing on something real. By morning, Bennett would still believe the future was waiting for him like a prize someone had wrapped and labeled with his name. Vivian would believe the worst was behind her son. Paige would probably already be imagining what color she wanted on the dining room walls. And somewhere under all that confidence, a floor I could already see through was about to give way. Chapter 5. The next morning, the courthouse looked exactly the way life-changing places often do in real life, smaller and less cinematic than fear imagines. Williamson County Family Court sat behind pale brick and clean windows with a flag outside, and a lobby that smelled faintly like copier toner and old coffee. People were already gathered in the hallway when Nina and I arrived. A young couple in gym clothes sat shoulder to shoulder staring at the floor. A man in a construction vest argued quietly into his phone. A grandmother held a crying toddler near the vending machines. No thunder, no dramatic music. Just ordinary people waiting for ordinary legal machinery to tell them what their lives would look like next. Bennett was at the far end of the hall with Harold Whitman, one hand in his pocket posture loose, like a man waiting to sign a closing packet for a property he had already mentally moved into. Vivian sat on a bench nearby with her handbag in her lap, and a look on her face that I had come to recognize as moral satisfaction disguised as concern. She nodded at me once, tight and cool, the way women greet people they think will soon be safely behind them. Paige was not in the courtroom, but she was close enough to see when the door opened. She stood near the elevators in a camel coat and sunglasses pushed into her hair, scrolling her phone and pretending not to watch. She looked like the future if the future were made of beige cashmere and filtered photos. Nina touched my elbow lightly. "Do not look at her," she said. I was not going to. I had already spent too much of my marriage arranging my reactions around other women's comfort. Inside the courtroom, everything felt flatter than I had expected. Beige walls, a seal behind the bench, tables that had seen too many elbows and too many lies. Judge Elaine Mercer entered with the efficient energy of someone who had spent decades watching people destroy each other while insisting they were being reasonable. We stood. We sat. The hearing began. The terms were laid out cleanly, which somehow made them feel crueler. Bennett would retain the House primary control of Rowan Crest Homes, the vehicles tied to the company, and the visible framework of the life he had spent months insisting was his alone. I would receive a settlement sufficient to establish myself independently, preserve stability for Mason, and separate myself cleanly from the business obligations and structures attached to Bennett's operation. Judge Mercer reviewed the packet with the expression of a woman who missed very little and enjoyed explaining even less. Harold was the first person at that table who looked wrong. Not panicked, not yet, just tight around the eyes. He turned pages more slowly than before, going back once, then again tracing with one finger through the section attached to the agreement. Responsibility allocation, encumbrances, operational liabilities, internal acknowledgement of obligations attached to the entities Bennett insisted on retaining in full. He leaned toward Bennett. I could not hear the first thing he said, but I saw Bennett's face stay blank for one beat too long, the way faces do when the brain refuses to process a sentence because it arrived dressed as bad news. Harold leaned closer. This time I caught enough. If you sign off on this, as written, those obligations stay with the structures you insisted on keeping. Bennett took the papers from him more sharply than he meant to. He read. His jaw changed first. Not open shock, just a sudden hard set like the muscles forgot what expression they were supposed to hold. Then his eyes started moving faster. Back up the page, down again, to another section. To the addendum Harold had warned him to review more carefully weeks ago. He looked at Harold. "That is not what this means," he said, too low for anyone but the nearest of us to hear. Harold did not blink. "It is exactly what it means." Bennett turned another page. No, this is not what was presented." Judge Mercer looked up. "Mr. Rowan, do you need a moment with counsel?" He stood too quickly, chair scraping back against the floor. "I was advised this was a straightforward asset division." Harold's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. Not sympathy, not even frustration, just the weary restraint of a man who knew he had told the truth and would now have to watch someone else call it betrayal. "Your Honor," Harold said, my client was expressly advised to conduct further review on liabilities and declined to do so. There is a signed acknowledgement in the record. Judge Mercer extended her hand. Harold passed it up. The room went very still. She read for less than a minute. When she looked back down, her gaze landed on Bennett with no warmth in it at all. "Mr. Rowan, the record reflects that you were advised to obtain additional financial review before execution and chose not to. The record also reflects that the obligations attached to the entities and assets you sought to retain were disclosed as part of this agreement. This court is not in the business of protecting parties from terms they decline to understand." For the first time since he announced the divorce at our dinner table, Bennett truly looked uncertain. Not angry, not superior, not polished. Just a man who had mistaken a glossy surface for structural integrity and was discovering too late that the two were not the same thing. He looked at me then, and I knew exactly what he wanted. Not mercy, clarification. Some sign that I would step in and help translate the life he had spent months telling everyone only he understood. I gave him the truth instead. "You wanted everything except Mason," I said quietly. "You got exactly what you chose." I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. I did not need to. The sentence landed because it was clean. Vivian made a small sound behind him, one of those involuntary breath catches people make when reality embarrasses them in public. Bennett started to say something else, but Judge Mercer was already moving on, finalizing language, closing the matter, reducing our years to a set of enforceable lines and signatures. That was the thing I had waited to understand. Justice in real life rarely feels triumphant in the moment. It feels procedural, papered, dry. The satisfaction comes later when the truth starts collecting interest. Paige was gone by the time we stepped into the hall. Not dramatically. No confrontation. No tears. Just gone. Her coat no longer visible near the elevator bank, as if the building had quietly swallowed the part of the future she had shown up to claim. Vivian approached me before Bennett could. "I think perhaps there were details none of us fully understood," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost pleading in its effort to become reasonable. "Bennett has been under a tremendous amount of stress." I looked at her and felt nothing but distance. "You seem to understand everything very clearly when you thought I was the one losing." Her mouth tightened. She turned toward her son. "Bennett, do not stand there. Say something." But there was nothing he could say that was more useful than silence now. His lawyer was already gathering papers with the resigned efficiency of a man who knew the next phase would be triage, not victory. Lila called that evening. I let it ring once, then answered. "Ava," she said, and I could hear fear in her voice before apology, which told me more than any confession would have. I did not know it was like this. I swear to God, I thought he was just trying to stay ahead of things. I thought he was venting. I thought you two were both just saying things in confidence. "You thought wrong," I said. "Please let me explain." "No, just that. No. There are relationships you end because of one terrible act, and relationships you end because the terrible act reveals the person was never what you called them to begin with." Mason did not say much on the drive home from court. He watched out the passenger window, one leg bouncing his silence fuller than words. At the apartment, he went to his room, came back down 15 minutes later, and found me in the kitchen with both hands braced on the counter. The sage cabinets looked greener in the late light. The apartment was quiet in the honest way small spaces are quiet. No echo, no room for performance. He stood there for a second, then said, "Dad looked scared." I nodded. He was. Mason swallowed. "Grandma, too." "Yes." He came farther into the kitchen, and Paige left. I looked at him. He was 16 and trying not to sound wounded by the fact that he had noticed all of it. "I think she thought there was more money than there is," he said. "More stability," I said. He leaned against the counter across from me and stared at the chipped edge near the sink. "I thought you had just stopped fighting," he said. There it was, the one sentence I had dreaded hearing for months. I felt my throat tighten. That was the hardest part, I told him. Not the house, not the divorce. There were days I did not know if you thought I was weak, or if you thought I just did not care enough to fight for what mattered. Mason looked up fast. "I never thought you did not care. You thought I gave up." His eyes dropped again, and because he was still my son, because he was still a boy trying to grow into a man without copying the wrong one, he answered honestly. "Yeah," he said. "I did. I let that sit between us. No anger, no punishment. Then I said I was trying to make sure when this finally broke it did not fall on you too." He blinked hard, then nodded once. That was all. No movie speech, no grand reconciliation, just truth finding the place it had been denied. A month later, the consequences started arriving in the order Harold had probably predicted from the start. Pressure on carrying costs, pressure on vendor payments, pressure on lines of credit, urgency around assets that looked better on a brochure than they did under scrutiny. Houses do not care about ego. Loans do not care about narrative. If a structure is weak, life eventually tests the beam. I heard pieces through public filings, through people who still knew me, through the kind of quiet local gossip that travels faster once a family's image stops protecting it. Bennett was trying to sell one property faster than planned. A payment issue had rippled into another. There was talk of litigation from a supplier. Harold's name kept appearing in connection with damage control, not celebration. I never asked for details. I had done enough carrying. My own life, small as it looked from the outside, started becoming solid in places that mattered. The settlement gave me room to breathe. The accounts that were truly mine stayed mine. Russell helped me set the right protections around what needed protecting for Mason. Nina checked in twice each time, sounding less like my attorney and more like a woman quietly pleased that I had not let anyone explain my own life to me. Then Sandra Bell called. She owned a small home decor store in Franklin and had heard through someone from school that I had a background in staging and interiors. She needed help pulling together a listing for a downsizing client and wanted to know if I took independent projects. That was the first time in years anyone asked for my taste without Bennett's name attached to it. I said yes before fear could dress itself up as practicality. The work was small, honest, mine. I stood in someone else's dining room 3 days later, moving a console table 3 inches to the left, and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for a very long time. Bennett came by once after that, late afternoon, no warning. I opened the door and almost did not recognize him without certainty, holding his face together. He looked thinner, not ruined, just eroded. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We are talking." He glanced past me into the apartment. The green cabinets, the narrow hall, Mason's backpack by the wall, a place no one would ever mistake for status, which may have been why it finally looked like peace. "I did not know it was all that bad," he said. That was not an apology. It was a confession of arrogance. I nodded. "I know." He waited for more. For rescue, maybe. For the old instinct in me that rushed to translate smooth fix. It never came. "I hope you figure it out," I said. Then I closed the door. That night, Mason heated leftovers while I answered an email from Sandra about a second job. The apartment smelled like garlic and detergent. Outside, someone laughed in the parking lot. Inside, nothing gleamed, nothing performed, nothing asked me to disappear so another person could look bigger. I did not get my old life back. I got my own name back, and that turned out to be worth more than the house. If you stayed with me through all of this, thank you. Stories like this hit hard because too many people know some version of them. If this one stayed with you, let me know, and if you want the next story, stay a little longer.